What started as a petty HOA argument over a native garden quickly escalated to a special response team surrounding our home. They thought they were just dealing with defiant residents, but they had no idea they were about to trigger the unraveling of a vast, corrupt network. The moving truck had barely pulled away from the curb when we got our first taste of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. It came in the form of a woman named Brenda, who moved with the stiff, self-important gait of a palace guard. She held a clipboard like a scepter and wore a visor that seemed permanently fused to her forehead. She introduced herself not as our neighbor, but as the president of the board, a title she uttered with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. Her welcoming gift wasn't a pie or a bottle of wine, it was a laminated 30-page booklet of bylaws and a passive-aggressive comment about our moving van blocking the flow of traffic for an unacceptable duration. My wife, Eleanor, a woman who professionally manages a county budget of 9 figures and oversees thousands of employees, just smiled a tight, polite smile and assured Brenda we'd be more considerate in the future. I knew that smile. It was her, I'm dealing with a toddler in a business suit smile. I, on the other hand, just wanted to get our boxes unpacked. I thought that would be the end of it. How naive I was. The real war began over the garden. Our house, like all the others in this cookie-cutter paradise, came with a chemically treated, water-guzzling green carpet of a lawn. Eleanor despised it. Her job is a pressure cooker of politics, public safety, and endless meetings. Her one true escape is gardening. Not just any gardening, though. She's passionate about creating native plant ecosystems, miniature prairies filled with milkweed for the monarchs, coneflowers for the goldfinches, and bee balm for the pollinators. It's her sanctuary, a small way to push back against the concrete and asphalt of her daily life. So we spent our first few weekends ripping out the soulless turf and carefully planting our chaotic, beautiful, life-giving patch of wilderness. We even submitted a landscaping plan to the HOA, as required, detailing the environmental benefits. We heard nothing back, so we assumed silence was consent. Another catastrophic miscalculation. The first notice appeared taped to our door. It was a formal violation, citing an unapproved state of wild overgrowth, and demanding we rectify the situation by installing board-approved sod. A fine of $50 was attached. We laughed it off, drafted a polite letter referencing our submitted plan and the ecological importance of our garden, and mailed it to the HOA's P.O. box. A week later, a second notice arrived. This time the fine was $200, and the language was sharper, accusing us of willful defiance of community standards. This time, Brenda didn't use the mail. She marched up our walkway one Saturday morning while Eleanor was on her knees, happily tending to her black-eyed Susans. "Mrs. Miller," Brenda began, her voice dripping with condescension, "I see you've received our notices and have chosen to ignore them." Eleanor stood up, wiping the dirt from her hands onto her jeans. She's not a tall woman, but she has a presence that can make generals sit up straight. "Brenda, I haven't ignored them," she said, her tone level and calm. "I responded in writing. This garden is not in violation. It's a planned, native habitat." Brenda scoffed, a sound like air leaking from a tire. "It's weeds. It's an eyesore that is dragging down the property values of this entire community. Your plan was denied. You were notified. We had, in fact, received no such notification." "When was it denied?" Eleanor asked, her voice losing a bit of its warmth. "We received no communication." "The board reviews plans on the 3rd Wednesday of the month. It was denied. The minutes are public record," Brenda snapped, as if this was common knowledge everyone should know. "You will remove this mess, or the daily fines will continue to accrue. And believe me, we have other ways of ensuring compliance." The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. This was the moment Eleanor's professional demeanor kicked in. She took a step forward, her expression unreadable. "Brenda," she said, her voice now quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority, "this is my property. The garden stays. If you continue to levy baseless fines and make veiled threats, I'll have our attorney review the HOA covenants and your board's procedures. I am quite certain we can find a resolution that doesn't involve you dictating my landscaping choices." Brenda's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. She was used to retirees and young families who were too scared or too tired to fight back. She was not used to Eleanor. "You think you're so smart," Brenda spat, her composure cracking. "You people move in here and think you're above the rules. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "No idea." She turned on her heel and stormed away, her clipboard held so tightly her knuckles were white. A week went by in silence. We started to think maybe Eleanor's firm stance had worked. Maybe Brenda had finally backed down. We received no more notices. No more fines appeared in our mailbox. Life felt normal. We'd made a mistake, we figured. We'd underestimated her pettiness, but ultimately she was just a woman with a clipboard and a power trip. Last night we were settled in for the evening, watching a movie. It was just after 9 p.m. The neighborhood was quiet, blanketed in that sleepy, suburban hush. It started as a low thumping sound, a rhythmic whoomp 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 that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. I paused the movie. "Is that a helicopter?" I asked Eleanor. She was already on her feet, her head cocked, listening. Her years of dealing with emergency services had given her an instinct for these things. The sound grew louder, deafeningly so, until it felt like it was right on top of our house. Then our world exploded in light and noise. Blinding white spotlights pierced through our windows from multiple directions, turning our living room into a sterile, terrifying stage. Outside, tires screeched on the pavement. The heavy slam of multiple car doors echoed through the walls. We looked at each other, our faces pale in the strobing red and blue lights that now painted our walls. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Through the chaos, a voice distorted and amplified by a bullhorn cut through the night, a voice that struck pure, icy terror into my soul. "This is the Sheriff's Department Special Response Team. Occupants of 124 Willow Creek Lane, you are surrounded. Exit the residence with your hands empty and in the air. You have 10 seconds before we breach the door." My brain simply shut down. The sheer absurdity of the situation was too much for my system to process. Special response team? Surrounded? Breach the door? We were watching a nature documentary 5 minutes ago. I looked at Eleanor, expecting to see the same terror reflected in her eyes, but what I saw was something else entirely. The civilian was gone. The calm, dirt under the fingernails gardener had vanished, and in her place was the director of public safety. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Her eyes, narrowed and analytical, were already scanning the room, assessing the points of entry, the angles of the spotlights, the tactical reality of our situation. "Get away from the windows, Mark," she commanded, her voice low and steady, cutting through the bullhorn's blare. "Go to the back of the house and get your phone. Start recording everything." I was frozen, a deer in the most literal headlights I'd ever experienced. "Ellie, what is happening? This has to be a mistake. They've got the wrong house." "It's not a mistake," she said, her lips a thin, hard line. "It's Brenda. That woman has lost her mind." The bullhorn crackled again. 5 seconds. The finality of the countdown jolted me into motion. I fumbled for my phone on the coffee table, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I scrambled towards the hallway leading to the back bedrooms, pressing the record button as I went. Eleanor didn't follow. Instead, she walked calmly towards the front door, her posture ramrod straight. She wasn't putting her hands up. "Ellie, what are you doing?" I whisper yelled, the phone wobbling in my grip. "They have guns." "They work for me," she said, without turning around. It was such a simple, factual statement, yet in that moment it sounded like the most insane thing I'd ever heard. She reached the front door, flicked on the porch light, and with a deep breath she turned the deadbolt and pulled the door wide open. The scene that greeted us was from a movie. A dozen figures clad in black tactical gear, helmets and body armor, were crouched behind a massive armored vehicle parked on our new lawn on top of Eleanor's beloved coneflowers. Red and blue lights strobed silently, painting the night in chaos. At least 10 rifles, equipped with tactical lights that seared my retinas, were pointed directly at our front door, directly at my wife. A man in the front, clearly the team leader, stepped forward. His face was obscured by a helmet and visor, his weapon held at the ready. "On your knees! Hands on your head! Now!" he screamed, his voice raw and amplified by pure adrenaline. Eleanor didn't move a muscle. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, silhouetted in the doorway, her 5'5" frame somehow looking more imposing than the armored vehicle crushing her garden. "Put the weapons down," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a chilling authority that cut through the tension. The team leader hesitated for a fraction of a second, thrown off by her lack of fear. "I said get on the ground," he repeated, taking another aggressive step forward. "And I'm telling you to stand down," Eleanor replied, her voice dropping a decibel, becoming even more dangerous. "My name is Eleanor Miller. I am the Director of Public Safety for this county. You are Captain Frank Howell, and that is Sergeant Diaz to your left. You are pointing county-issued firearms at your superior officer, and you are currently trespassing on my property and destroying my garden. You have 30 seconds to explain who authorized this operation before I personally see to it that you are both reassigned to inventory management in the county evidence locker for the rest of your careers." Silence. The kind of profound, absolute silence that follows a sonic boom. The strobing lights continued their frantic dance, but the world seemed to hold its breath. I could see the team leader, Captain Howell, physically recoil as if he'd been struck. He slowly lowered his weapon a few inches. He peered at Eleanor, his head tilted. The blinding spotlights behind him made it impossible for him to see her face clearly. "Director Miller?" he stammered, his voice suddenly losing all its ferocity. It was barely a whisper. "Confirm call sign." "Blue Jay," Eleanor said instantly. "The same call sign I've used for the last 6 years. The one you use every time you call me to authorize overtime for your team, Frank." The captain flinched at the use of his first name. He immediately lowered his rifle completely and held up a hand to his team. "Stand down! Stand down!" he yelled, his voice now laced with panic. The dozens of red laser dots that had been dancing on Eleanor's chest vanished. Weapons were lowered. A collective, confused murmur rippled through the assembled officers. Captain Howell took off his helmet, revealing a face pale with shock and slick with sweat. He looked utterly horrified. "Ma'am, Director, we had a call," he stammered, walking forward tentatively, as if approaching a sleeping bear. "What kind of call, Captain?" Eleanor asked, her voice like ice. "Could possibly warrant this level of response at my home?" The captain swallowed hard, his eyes flicking nervously from my wife to the shadows behind the police line, where neighborhood residents were starting to gather. I followed his gaze and my blood ran cold. Standing there on the edge of the police tape with her arms crossed and a sickeningly triumphant smirk on her face was Brenda. The captain cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the 911 dispatch received an anonymous tip. A high-priority, Class 1 alert. The caller reported a violent domestic situation at this address. She said there was a man holding a woman hostage at gunpoint. The caller specifically stated that the man was, well, she described your husband and claimed he had illegal fully automatic weapons in the house. The words hung in the night air, thick and poisonous. Illegal, fully automatic weapons. A hostage situation. They weren't here for the lawn. They were here because some lunatic had called in a swatting, a malicious, life-threatening prank designed to trigger the most extreme law enforcement response possible. And the architect of that potential tragedy was standing just 50 feet away, basking in the chaos she had created. My phone was still recording, capturing the flashing lights, the heavily armed officers, and the smug look on Brenda's face. Eleanor's gaze followed mine and locked onto the HOA president. The fury in her eyes was so intense it was almost a physical force. It wasn't the anger of a homeowner annoyed about her garden anymore. It was the cold, calculated wrath of a public official who had just seen her entire department manipulated and weaponized for a petty neighborhood dispute. She looked back at Captain Howell, whose face had gone from pale to ghost white. He understood now. He understood the monumental career-ending catastrophe he had just stepped into. "Captain," Eleanor said, her voice dangerously calm. "Did dispatch make any attempt to verify this anonymous tip? Did they run the address through the system? Did anyone think to check the identity of the registered owner of 124 Willow Creek Lane before deploying a full special response team with armored support?" The captain opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked like a fish gasping for air. "Ma'am, the call came in hot. The protocol for a hostage situation with reported heavy weapons is immediate deployment. The caller sounded frantic, credible. She claimed she heard screaming. She claimed, Eleanor repeated, letting the words hang in the air. So, you deployed a dozen officers, risked a violent confrontation, and terrified an entire neighborhood based on the unverified, anonymous claim of a single caller. Is that the protocol you'll be citing in your incident report, Captain? He winced. The term incident report was now synonymous with internal affairs investigation. He knew, as well as she did, that a major breach of protocol had just occurred. He and his superiors would be buried in paperwork and facing a review board for weeks. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice barely audible. "That is not protocol. We messed up, Director. Badly." Eleanor held his gaze for a long moment, letting the gravity of his failure sink in. Then she shifted her attention. "Sergeant Diaz," she called out, her voice ringing with command. Sergeant Diaz, a stocky officer who had been standing near the armored vehicle, snapped to attention. "Matiam, take 2 of your officers," Eleanor instructed, pointing a single, steady finger towards the gawking crowd. "Go over there and detain that woman in the pink tracksuit. Her name is Brenda, last name unknown. She is the president of the local HOA. Read her rights. She is being detained for questioning on suspicion of filing a false police report, conspiracy to commit public mischief, and misuse of emergency services. Seize her phone as evidence. And Diaz?" The sergeant paused. "Yes, ma'am." "Be professional," Eleanor said, a razor's edge in her tone. "But don't be gentle." Sergeant Diaz nodded, a grim understanding on his face. He and 2 other officers broke off from the group and began walking purposefully towards a suddenly very panicked-looking Brenda. Her smug smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. She started backing away as they approached, holding up her hands. "What is this? I'm the one who called for help. I'm a concerned citizen. You can't do this." Her shrill protests were cut off as Sergeant Diaz and his officers efficiently and firmly placed her in handcuffs, the metallic click echoing in the sudden quiet. The neighbors, who had gathered to watch the drama unfold, now gasped collectively. The narrative had shifted entirely. This wasn't a crime scene. It was a public shaming. The woman who ruled their lives with an iron fist, who measured their grass with a ruler and fined them for leaving their trash cans out for an extra hour, was being led away in handcuffs. Eleanor turned back to Captain Howell, who looked profoundly relieved to no longer be the sole focus of her wrath. "Frank," she said, her voice softening just a fraction, "get your people out of here, and get that truck off my goddamn lawn. We will have a full debriefing tomorrow morning, 0800, my office, and you will bring every scrap of documentation related to this call, the dispatch recording, the logs, everything. Are we clear?" Crystal, ma'am," he said, nodding vigorously. He turned and began barking orders, his voice filled with a newfound urgency. The tactical unit, which had arrived with such terrifying precision, now scrambled to pack up with the clumsy haste of teenagers caught throwing a party. As the armored vehicle backed off her flattened coneflowers, leaving deep muddy ruts in its wake, Eleanor finally let out a long, slow breath. The tension seemed to drain from her shoulders. She turned and walked back inside, closing the door on the retreating chaos. I finally stopped recording, my hand aching from gripping the phone so tightly. "Ellie," I started, not even knowing what to say. She looked at me, and for the first time that night, I saw a flicker of weariness in her eyes. "This isn't over, Mark," she said quietly. "This goes deeper than just Brenda. Someone in my own department, in the 911 dispatch center, had to have greenlit this. A call like that, against a high-level official's address. It should have raised 1,000 red flags. It should have gone up the chain of command directly to me or the sheriff." She walked over to the window, peering through the blinds at the last of the retreating police cars. Someone bypassed protocol. Someone wanted this to happen. Brenda may have been the weapon, but she wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. Someone inside the department helped her. She turned to me, her face grim. And I'm going to find out who. The debriefing the next morning was less of a meeting and more of a tribunal. Eleanor's office, usually a place of organized calm, felt like a pressurized chamber. I was there, at her insistence, sitting in a chair against the wall. Sheriff Miller, no relation, a constant source of bureaucratic confusion, was there, a mountain of a man with a perpetually worried expression that had deepened into a canyon overnight. Captain Howell and a pale, nervous woman from 911 dispatch named Patricia completed the group. The air crackled with tension. Eleanor sat behind her large oak desk, not speaking, just letting the silence do the heavy lifting. On the desk, a small speaker played a recording from the 911 call. Brenda's voice, artificially high and choked with fake sobs, filled the room. "He's got a gun. I heard her screaming. He's always been so quiet. You never know with those types. He has illegal weapons. I've seen them. You have to hurry before he hurts her." It was a masterful performance of malicious fiction. When it ended, Eleanor clicked off the speaker. "Patricia," she began, her voice soft but unforgiving. "Talk me through the intake procedure for this call." The dispatch supervisor squirmed. "Director, the call came in on the emergency line. The caller was hysterical. She reported an active domestic violence situation with a firearm and a hostage. Protocol dictates we dispatch immediately and gather more information while the units are en route." "And at what point in this process," Eleanor continued, her eyes fixed on the woman, "did you run the address, as is standard procedure?" Patricia swallowed. I ran it as soon as the call was flagged for dispatch, Mom." "And what did the system show?" It showed the registered owner as Eleanor Miller." "Your address, Director." A heavy silence descended on the room. Sheriff Miller let out a low groan and rubbed his temples. "So, you saw the name of the county director of public safety," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The head of your entire department. And you still authorized a full special response team deployment without making a single phone call up the chain of command. You didn't think to call the sheriff. You didn't think to call me on my personal cell, which you have." Patricia's composure finally broke. Tears welled in her eyes. "Brenda, the caller, she's my aunt," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of fear and regret. "She called me on my personal line first, told me this whole story. She said you two had been fighting, that your husband was unhinged. She said she was scared for your life. She begged me to help, to do something before it was too late. She said you'd be too proud or too scared to call yourself." I believed her. I panicked. I routed the call through the official system myself, using a voice modulator to anonymize it so it would look like a legitimate anonymous tip. I flagged it as Class 1 myself. I thought I was protecting you, ma'am." My jaw dropped. This wasn't just a failure of protocol. It was a conspiracy. A pathetic, petty conspiracy born from a bruised ego and a family connection. Sheriff Miller swore under his breath, a low, rumbling sound. Eleanor, however, remained unnervingly still. She just stared at Patricia, her expression a mixture of pity and steel. "You didn't protect me, Patricia. You endangered me. You endangered my husband. You endangered every officer on Captain Howell's team and every resident in my neighborhood. You used a tactical unit as a tool for your aunt's personal vendetta against my choice of perennials." She stood up, the authority radiating from her palpable. "Sheriff, please escort Ms. Evans to a quiet room. An internal affairs investigator will be with her shortly. She is on administrative leave, effective immediately, and her security credentials for this building are revoked." The sheriff nodded grimly and gestured for Patricia to stand. The now sobbing woman was led from the room, leaving just me, Eleanor, the sheriff, and a deeply ashamed Captain Howell. "Frank," Eleanor said, turning her attention to the captain, "you're not blameless here. You took a hot call at face value and rolled out like you were storming a fortress. You got played, but you owned your mistake, so you're going to lead the internal review. I want a top-to-bottom audit of the SRT deployment protocols. I want to know how this happened, and I want a new system in place to ensure it never, ever happens again. Understood?" "Yes, Director, absolutely," he said, relief washing over his face. He'd been given a chance to fix his mistake, not just be punished for it. He practically scurried out of the room. Now it was just the three of us. The sheriff finally spoke. "Ellie, what do you want to do about Brenda?" Eleanor walked to the window, looking down at the city below. "The DA is already drawing up the charges. Filing a false police report is the least of them. Given the scale of the response, they're looking at inducing panic and conspiracy. She's looking at felonies. Her life as she knows it is over. Good, the sheriff grumbled. Serves her right. But Eleanor shook her head slowly. It's not that simple, Jim. I've been digging. Brenda isn't just some power-tripping HOA president. She has connections. She's cousins with Councilman Richards. My stomach clenched. Councilman Richards. He was a snake in a $1,000 suit, a local politician who had been a thorn in Eleanor's side since she took the job. He fought her on every budget request, publicly questioned her department's spending, and generally made her professional life a living hell. He saw her as a rival, a barrier to his own political ambitions. Richards, the sheriff said, his eyes widening. You think he was involved in this? I don't know, Eleanor admitted. But it's a hell of a coincidence. Brenda calls in a fake, career-ending emergency on me, and her cousin just happens to be my biggest political enemy. It smells, Jim. It smells bad. That afternoon, we got a call from our lawyer. The charges against Brenda were being filed. But there was a complication. A high-powered law firm, the kind that usually handles corporate mergers, not petty criminals, had stepped in to represent her. They had posted her bail immediately. Brenda was out. And the law firm? It was the same one Councilman Richards kept on a permanent retainer. He's behind this, I said, the moment Eleanor hung up the phone. He has to be. He put her up to it. It's what I suspect, Eleanor said, pacing our living room. But suspecting isn't proving. He's insulated. Brenda's his cutout. She'll take the fall, and he'll walk away clean. It felt hopeless. This man had tried to ruin our lives, to potentially get one of us killed, and he was going to get away with it. But then Eleanor stopped pacing. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. It was a smile I recognized. It was the smile she got right before she checkmated an opponent in a game of chess. He thinks he's insulated, she said softly. He thinks he's untouchable. He's forgotten what I do for a living. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. Jim, it's me, she said. I need you to pull the complete, unredacted financials for the Willow Creek HOA. I want every bank statement, every invoice, every contract for the last 5 years. I have a feeling that if we look closely at how Brenda has been spending the neighborhood's money, we might just find a trail that leads directly back to her dear cousin. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of quiet, methodical investigation. Our house became a command center. Stacks of documents, bank statements, and invoices from the Willow Creek HOA covered our dining room table. What Eleanor was doing was technically, and I stress, technically, within the bounds of her authority. A complaint had been filed against the HOA president that involved misuse of public resources, which gave her department a narrow legal window to scrutinize the organization's activities. It was a loophole, but a perfectly legal one. Sheriff Miller, a man who clearly relished the opportunity to go after a corrupt politician, delivered the boxes of files himself. It's a rat's nest, Ellie, he said, dropping a heavy banker's box on the floor. Their books are a mess. Looks like they have been cooking them for years. Eleanor didn't need to cook them. She needed to read them. And she reads budgets and financial statements the way a cryptographer reads code. She can spot a phantom invoice or a padded expense report from a mile away. I kept her supplied with coffee and acted as a sounding board while she sifted through 5 years of petty tyranny and financial mismanagement. It started with the small things. Absurdly high invoices for community landscaping from a company called Green Pastures LLC. Contracts for security patrols from a firm that seemed to exist only on paper. Then she found the pattern. Green Pastures LLC was registered to Brenda's maiden name. The security firm was owned by her brother-in-law. For years, Brenda had been using the HOA's mandatory dues as her personal slush fund, funneling money to herself and her family through bogus companies for services that were either overpriced or never rendered at all. This is embezzlement, plain and simple, I said, looking at a particularly blatant invoice for $5,000 for seasonal planting at the neighborhood's entrance, a small patch of dirt with 3 perpetually dying rose bushes. She's been stealing from her neighbors for years. She has, Eleanor agreed, her eyes scanning another document. But this is bigger than just Brenda skimming off the top. This is organized. Look at this." She pointed to a line item from 3 years ago, a payment of $25,000 to a consulting firm named Richards and Associates. "Richards and Associates?" I asked. "As in Councilman Richards." "As in his brother's consulting firm," Eleanor confirmed, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "And look at the memo line. Community political outreach and zoning consultation. This HOA paid a $25,000 consulting fee to the brother of the city councilman who sits on the zoning board. And what happened 6 months later?" She pulled up an old news article on her laptop. The headline read, "City Zoning Board approves controversial rezoning for Willow Creek expansion." The expansion had been a huge deal. It allowed the developer to build 50 more houses on a piece of land previously zoned for a park, dramatically increasing the value of the development and, by extension, the power of the HOA. It was a kickback, I breathed, the pieces clicking into place. The developer paid the HOA, who then paid Richard's brother, who funneled it to the councilman to grease the wheels for the rezoning. And Brenda got to keep her little kingdom running, skimming off the top with Richard's political protection. Eleanor finished. "This wasn't just about my garden, Mark. When I threatened to bring in a lawyer to review the HOA's covenants, Brenda didn't just hear a threat to her authority. She heard a threat to her entire criminal enterprise. She panicked. She called her cousin, the councilman, and they cooked up this insane plan to discredit me, to get me fired or buried in an internal investigation, so I'd be too busy to look into their books. We had him. We had the trail. It was circumstantial, but it was strong. The financial ties between the HOA, the fake companies, and the councilman's family were undeniable. The timing of the payments and the zoning vote was too perfect to be a coincidence. Eleanor spent the rest of the day preparing a detailed brief, cross-referencing bank records with city council meeting minutes. She was building an airtight case, not for a local DA, but for the state's public integrity unit. This had moved beyond a simple case of filing a false police report. This was public corruption. The next morning she was scheduled to meet with the state investigators. She was calm, focused, and ready. She had Councilman Richards in her sights, and she wasn't going to miss. She was about to leave when her work phone buzzed. It was an alert from the county's emergency notification system. She frowned as she read it. "That's odd," she said. "What is it?" I asked. "There's a fire, a big one, at the county records annex." My blood ran cold. The county records annex, the massive climate-controlled warehouse on the other side of town, the place where the county stored all its physical documents. "Which documents?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Eleanor's face was pale. "The originals," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The original physical copies of every city contract, every zoning application, every financial disclosure for the last 50 years. The original copies of the HOA's incorporation papers and all the documents from the Willow Creek expansion deal. The paper trail. It's all in that building." A fire. Of course, a fire. It was brutally, criminally elegant. Richards wasn't just trying to insulate himself anymore. He was scorching the earth behind him. Digital copies existed, of course, but a skilled lawyer, the kind Richards kept on retainer, could argue for years about their authenticity, about the possibility of digital manipulation. The original paper documents, with their wet ink signatures and notary stamps, were the bedrock of a corruption case. Without them, the foundation of Eleanor's investigation turned to sand. "Let's go," she said, grabbing her keys. There was no hesitation. She was back in director mode, a cool professionalism settling over her features, masking the fury I knew was simmering just beneath the surface. The drive to the records annex was surreal. Plumes of thick black smoke were visible for miles, a funeral pyre for the truth, rising against the clear morning sky. As we got closer, the air grew thick with the smell of burning paper and chemicals. An entire perimeter had been established, a chaotic ballet of fire trucks, police cruisers, and emergency vehicles. Eleanor flashed her credentials at the barricade, and we were waved through. She parked the car a safe distance away, and we got out, immediately hit by a wave of heat. The annex wasn't just on fire, it was an inferno. Flames licked out of the roof, and the windows had long since blown out. Firefighters were dousing the blaze from ladder trucks, but it was clear they were in containment mode. The building and everything in it was a total loss. The fire chief, a grizzled veteran named O'Malley, saw Eleanor and jogged over, his face smeared with soot. "Director," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's a bad one. Went up like a tinderbox. Looks like it started in the central archives, right where the zoning and contract records are stored." "Arson?" Eleanor asked, though the answer was obvious. "No doubt," O'Malley confirmed, shaking his head. "Accelerant was used. Whoever did this wanted to make damn sure nothing survived. My investigator found traces of it near a back maintenance door. They forced it open, bypassed the alarm. This was a professional job. A professional job." The words hung there, damning and final. This was beyond Brenda's petty scheming or even a politician's panicked cover-up. This was something else. This was a message. Eleanor stood there for a long time, staring at the roaring fire, her face an unreadable mask. The case she had painstakingly built over the last 2 days was turning to ash before her very eyes. The kickback, the zoning fraud, the embezzlement, all of it was now just her word against a powerful, protected councilman. Richards had won. He had checkmated her. "What now?" I asked quietly, putting a hand on her shoulder. She didn't answer for a moment. She just watched a section of the roof collapse inward with a deafening roar. "Now," she said finally, turning to me with a look in her eyes I had never seen before, a look of pure, unadulterated resolve. "Now it gets personal." We drove back home in silence. The energy had shifted. This was no longer just about exposing corruption or defending her reputation. Richards had tried to send armed men to our home. He had, through his proxy, threatened our lives. And when that failed, he had burned down a public building to cover his tracks, endangering the lives of firefighters and destroying irreplaceable public records. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. Back in our makeshift command center, Eleanor looked at the piles of documents on our dining room table. "He thinks he burned the evidence," she said, a new sharp edge to her voice. "He burned the originals, but he doesn't know what we have." She tapped the stack of papers. "These are just copies. The originals are gone, but every page I copied is admissible. More importantly, he doesn't know what else I found." My eyebrows shot up. What else? She had been so focused on the financial trail to Richards that I assumed that was the whole story. "Brenda wasn't just embezzling," Eleanor explained, pulling a separate, thinner folder from the bottom of the pile. "She was meticulous. She kept a ledger, a private one. It was tucked into the back of a binder full of landscaping receipts. It looks like her own personal insurance policy." She opened the folder. Inside were several pages of handwritten notes. It was a detailed accounting of every dirty transaction, every cash delivery, every secret meeting, dates, times, amounts, and names. Councilman Richards' name was all over it. But there was another name, one that appeared next to the largest and most frequent payments, a name I didn't recognize. "Who is Marcus Thorne?" I asked, pointing to the ledger. Eleanor's expression darkened. "He's not a politician," she said. "He's the head of a major construction firm that has received more no-bid city contracts in the last 5 years than any other company combined. All of them personally approved by Councilman Richards. This was the real conspiracy. The HOA kickback was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle of organized graft. Richards wasn't just helping a developer. He was running a massive pay-to-play scheme, using his political office to enrich himself and his associates. Brenda wasn't his partner. She was just his local bagman, a useful idiot to handle the small-time payoffs in his own neighborhood. So we still have him," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "The ledger proves everything." "It proves a lot," Eleanor corrected, "but it's still the word of a known embezzler against a powerful councilman and a millionaire contractor. Their lawyers would shred Brenda on the stand. We need more. We need something undeniable." She stared at the ledger, her finger tracing Marcus Thorne's name. "Richards burned a building to destroy paper," she mused, almost to herself. "He's old school. He thinks in terms of physical evidence, but people like Thorne, they don't operate in the world of paper anymore. They live in the cloud." Suddenly she stood up and grabbed her laptop. "Brenda's phone," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Diaz seized it as evidence. It's been sitting in the evidence locker this whole time. Her lawyer has been fighting to keep it locked. But after this fire, a judge just signed the warrant to have our tech guys crack it. The download just finished. An email notification popped up on her screen. The subject line read, Brenda Clark, phone data. Eleanor clicked it open. It was a massive file, the entire contents of Brenda's digital life. Photos, emails, search history, and text messages. Thousands of them. Eleanor's eyes scanned the screen and then they stopped. She drew in a sharp breath. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she whispered. She turned the laptop screen towards me. It was a text message thread between Brenda and an unsaved number. The last message, sent just a few hours before the fire, was chillingly simple. It read, "He's not backing down. Thorne says it's time for the insurance policy. He wants the package." Brenda's reply was a single word. "Where?" The response was an address I recognized. It was a self-storage facility on the industrial side of town, and below the address was a unit number, Unit 347, Unit 347. The address sat on the screen, glowing with menace. An insurance policy. A package. The implications were terrifyingly clear. This wasn't about financial records anymore. Brenda hadn't just been keeping a ledger, she had been holding on to physical leverage. Something tangible, something Thorne and Richards were now desperate to retrieve, so desperate they'd sent an arsonist to create a massive, fiery distraction. "They think we're focused on the fire," Eleanor said, her mind racing. "They sent a team to destroy the county records, assuming my investigation would die with them. At the same time, they're sending someone to collect the real evidence from Brenda's storage unit. It's a classic misdirection." She grabbed her phone and dialed Sheriff Miller. "Jim, I need a tactical team, quiet and out of sight, and I need a warrant. Now." She relayed the address of the storage facility and the unit number, her voice a low, urgent hum. "The probable cause is the text message from the phone of a woman already charged with multiple felonies, discussing the retrieval of an unknown package with a suspected co-conspirator on the same night as a major arson targeting a related investigation. It's thin, but it's enough. Tell the judge it's exigent circumstances. They're moving to destroy evidence as we speak." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ellie," the sheriff's voice crackled, "my guys are stretched thin with the annex fire. I can send a couple of patrol cars to sit on the place, but a full TAC team—" "No," Eleanor cut him off, her tone firm. "No marked cars, Jim. No uniforms. They can't know we're coming. If they spot a patrol car, whoever they sent will just back off and disappear. This has to be discreet. Send me whoever you can spare. Plain clothes, unmarked vehicles. Tell them to meet me there in 20 minutes. She hung up before he could argue. "What are we doing?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "We're going to a storage unit," she said, grabbing the keys and a heavy-duty mag light from a drawer. "And we're going to get there before they do." The drive to the industrial park was the longest 15 minutes of my life. My mind was reeling. What could be in that unit? What kind of insurance policy requires a secret retrieval in the dead of night? I imagined boxes of cash, illegal weapons, or something far worse. Eleanor, on the other hand, was a picture of focus. She drove with a steady, controlled speed, her eyes constantly scanning the road, her mirrors, her surroundings. The secure store facility was a desolate place, a maze of identical corrugated steel doors under the harsh glare of sodium vapor lamps. It was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A single, sleepy-looking guard sat in a small booth at the automated gate. Eleanor pulled up to the gate, rolled down the window, and flashed her badge. "Director Miller, County Public Safety. We're conducting a quiet investigation. I need you to open the gate and then go back to watching your television. Don't log our entry. Don't make any calls. We were never here. Do you understand?" The guard, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, stared at her badge, his eyes wide. He nodded dumbly and pressed a button. The gate slid open. We drove inside, the crunch of our tires on the gravel, the only sound. Eleanor killed the headlights and navigated through the numbered rows until we found the 300 block. We parked at the end of the row, concealed in the shadow of a large moving truck, and got out. The air was cold and smelled of diesel and dust. Unit 347 was halfway down the aisle. Its metal door was closed, secured by a heavy-duty circular lock. "The team is 5 minutes out," Eleanor whispered, checking her phone. "We wait for them." But we didn't have 5 minutes. Headlights cut across the far end of the facility, and a dark, nondescript panel van without license plates rolled slowly through the gate, which hadn't closed behind us. It drove without its lights, a silent predator stalking through the concrete jungle. It turned down our aisle and came to a stop directly in front of Unit 347. My heart pounded in my chest. We were exposed, with nothing but a parked truck for cover. 2 men got out of the van. They were not junk removal guys. They were big, dressed in dark work clothes, and moved with a purpose that screamed professional. One of them immediately pulled out a pair of bolt cutters, while the other stood watch, his hand resting uncomfortably close to a bulge under his jacket. There was no time to wait for backup. Eleanor looked at me, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "Stay here. Stay down. Call 911 if you hear anything other than me talking." Before I could protest, she was moving. She didn't draw a weapon. She didn't shout a warning. She just stepped out from behind the truck and started walking towards them, her footsteps echoing lightly on the pavement. The lookout spotted her instantly. His body tensed, and his hand moved to the bulge under his jacket. "Hey, place is closed," he growled, trying to sound intimidating. "Who are you?" Eleanor didn't stop walking. She just raised her badge, letting it catch the orange glow of the security lights. "County official," she said, her voice calm and even. "Routine inspection. What's in the van?" The man with the bolt cutters froze, the tool halfway to the lock. The 2 men exchanged a nervous glance. They hadn't planned for this. They were expecting an empty, silent facility. "You need to leave, lady," the lookout said, taking a step forward. "This is private property." "This is a potential crime scene," Eleanor corrected him, now only 10 feet away. "And you are 2 individuals attempting to break into a storage unit linked to an ongoing felony investigation. So I'm going to ask you again, what's in the van?" The man with the bolt cutters dropped them with a loud clang. He looked at his partner, his eyes wide with panic. The lookout, however, wasn't panicking. A cold, hard look settled on his face. He made his decision. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, and his hand moved, pulling the object from under his jacket. It wasn't a firearm. It was a taser. He lunged forward, aiming the device at Eleanor, just as the wail of distant sirens began to pierce the night. The man lunged, the taser held out like a venomous snake, its twin prongs ready to strike. I lurched forward, a strangled cry catching in my throat, but Eleanor was faster. She had anticipated his move. In a single, fluid motion that was both shocking and beautiful, she sidestepped his clumsy charge, grabbed his outstretched arm, and used his own momentum to twist his body around. There was a sickening crack as his wrist bent at an unnatural angle, and the taser clattered to the ground. The man screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony and surprise. His partner, the one who had dropped the bolt cutters, simply raised his hands in the air, his face a mask of surrender. He wanted no part of whatever was happening. The distant sirens grew louder, converging on our location. Headlights flashed at the entrance to the facility. The cavalry had arrived. The lookout, clutching his broken wrist, glared at Eleanor with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you just did," he spat through gritted teeth. "He'll bury you for this." "We'll see," Eleanor said calmly as Sheriff Miller's deputies swarmed the area, their weapons drawn. The 2 men were quickly handcuffed and secured. The brief, violent confrontation was over as quickly as it had begun. Sheriff Miller himself came striding down the aisle, his face a mixture of relief and fury. "Ellie, are you all right? I told you to wait." "No time, Jim," she said, nodding towards the storage unit. "Get that door open." It took the deputies less than a minute with a hydraulic tool to pop the lock. The heavy corrugated door rolled up with a deafening groan, revealing the dark, musty interior of Unit 347. Eleanor clicked on her mag light and swept the beam inside. It wasn't what I had expected. There were no boxes of cash, no crates of weapons. It was mostly filled with old furniture and dusty boxes labeled holiday decorations and old kitchen stuff, the typical detritus of a suburban life. But in the very back, behind a moth-eaten sofa, was a large heavy-duty metal footlocker. A deputy handed Eleanor a pair of bolt cutters, the ones the suspect had dropped, and she snapped the thick padlock on the chest. With a grunt, she and the sheriff lifted the heavy lid. The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the contents. It was filled with dozens of thick, bound folders. Each one was meticulously labeled with a date and the name of a project. Asphalt contract, Route 7, Convention Center plumbing bid, East Side redevelopment. I picked one up. It wasn't a copy. It was filled with original documents, invoices from Marcus Thorne's company with handwritten notes in the margins, internal city planning memos that should never have left the office, and most damning of all, deposit slips from an offshore bank account in Councilman Richards' name. Each folder was a complete, undeniable record of a separate instance of bribery and corruption. It was a decade's worth of evidence, detailing a systematic plundering of the city's coffers by Richards and Thorne. Brenda hadn't just kept a ledger. She had been the keeper of their entire criminal library. This was the real insurance policy. If Richards ever tried to cut her out, she could burn him to the ground. And now, Eleanor was holding the torch. The arrest of Councilman Richards was a media firestorm. He was taken from his office in City Hall in handcuffs, his usual arrogant smirk replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Marcus Thorne was picked up by state investigators at his corporate headquarters a few hours later. Faced with the mountain of evidence from the storage unit, the two thugs from the facility crumbled, giving full confessions about who had hired them, a fixer on Thorne's payroll, to retrieve the footlocker while the city was distracted by the fire at the records annex. The fixer, in turn, gave up Thorne and Richards. The final piece of the puzzle was Brenda. Her high-powered lawyer, paid for by Thorne, suddenly dropped her as a client. Facing a long list of felonies, from embezzlement to conspiracy and arson, her bravado evaporated. Her niece, Patricia from Dispatch, had already confessed everything she knew. With the full weight of the state bearing down on her, Brenda sang like a canary. She gave a detailed, hours-long confession that corroborated every single document in the footlocker, laying bare the entire criminal network. Councilman Richards and Marcus Thorne were facing decades in prison. Their organized scheme was dismantled, their careers and reputations utterly destroyed. For her cooperation, Brenda would still serve time, but far less than she would have otherwise. Her reign as the tyrant of Willow Creek was definitively over. A few weeks later, life began to return to normal. The HOA was in disarray, its leadership gone. An emergency meeting was called, and to my astonishment, our neighbors elected me the interim president, mostly on the platform of, "I will not call a special response team on you." My first act was to abolish the fine against Eleanor's garden. One sunny Saturday morning, Eleanor was back in her rightful place, on her knees in the dirt, tending to her beautiful chaotic patch of native wilderness. The coneflowers crushed by the armored vehicle were already showing signs of new life. I brought her out a glass of lemonade and sat on the steps of our porch, watching her. The peace and quiet of the neighborhood felt different now. It wasn't the silence of oppressive conformity. It was the silence of genuine peace. "You know," I said, "Richards thought he could ruin you. He threw everything he had at you. A corrupt HOA, a swatting, an arson." Eleanor looked up from a stubborn weed, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She smiled, a real genuine smile that reached her eyes. "He made a classic mistake," she said, pulling the weed free with a satisfying rip. "He thought the garden was the target." She gestured around at the milkweed and the bee balm, buzzing with life. "He didn't realize that the whole point of a garden like this is the strength of the roots."